Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of the program, of course, Eric Eggers. So, Eric, it's 2 weeks since the debate that sort of rocked the country, rocked the political campaign, and Biden has fought back. He says he's staying in the race. He's not going anywhere. He did the George Stephanopoulos interview, but the bleeding continues.
You know, it's weird that you say it's 2 weeks since the debate, because you're right, but that's not really like how I measure time anymore. It's still less than 1 week since we did an excellent job of guest hosting for Sean Hannity, and that I think is slightly more significant from a national perspective than the unveiling of this massive national scandal that Joe Biden's been in decline in health, and everyone's sort of been in on it. We played the clip during the show thanks to the great job of the producers of every pundit and reporter, everybody saying Joe Biden's better than ever. He's the best he's ever been. Like for years they've said that. People making millions of dollars have told us that he is the best. And now all of a sudden it's like a flip switched after the debate. New York Times comes out. Everybody says, no, he's got to go. I think it's up to 10 members of Congress have now called on him to step aside. He did the George Stephanopoulos interview. It didn't work. The New York Times has an op-ed that says he now still looks like a man in decline.
Ouch.
Poor Joe Biden.
And MSNBC is giving medical advice.
Well, they've been doing that during the commercials. There's like a lot. Trust me, the MSNBC audience is quite medically needy. They suffer from anxiety and lots of identification issues. I mean, that's not atypical. It's actually NBC News. Listen, NBC did an interview with this board-certified neurologist, Dr. Tom Pitts, and he was speaking about some issues. You know, the New York Times broke this story that one of the doctors, actually, and we'll talk about that in a second, with the White House, met with a Parkinson's expert 8 times in the last 8 months. And so I guess in reaction to that, NBC News has an actual neurologist on. Listen to what this neurologist said on NBC News about the President of the United States.
You noticed anything that gives you a red flag as a doctor?
Oh, yeah, I see him 20 times a day in clinic. I mean, it's ironic because he has just such classic features of neurodegeneration. I mean, word finding difficulties, and that's not, I couldn't find the word. That's from degeneration of the word retrieval area.
He's also overcome stuttering, though. Could that be part of that, too?
No, this is not a palatal issue or a speech discrepancy, which is very different from a lemino dysfunction, actual word retrieval, where you pick a similar question or talk around the issue, plus the rigidity, monotone voice.
Wait, go back to that, the rigidity. What do you mean?
Rigidity, loss of arm swing, standing up lordotically. You notice when he turns, it's kind of end block turning. It's not a quick turn. So that's one of the hallmarks of Parkinsonism is rigidity and bradykinesia, slow movement. And he has that hallmark, especially with the low voice that said was a cold, hypophonia. A small monotone voice like this over time is a hallmark of Parkinsonism. I could have diagnosed him from across the mall.
That's stunning. I mean, that's absolutely stunning to consider where NBC News was before the debate, where they were essentially saying that the videos showing all this activity that this neurologist is now talking about were cheap fakes, that they weren't emblematic of where Joe Biden was. So stunning reversal by the mainstream media. The dam has broken. And we want to break out today, Eric, the people that are now going after him, the mainstream media, what is their motivation, why they're doing it, and the people that are rallying to his defense. Why are they rallying to his defense? And of course, we study cronyism, corruption, and we think that has a role to play on both the people that are attacking him and those that are criticizing him.
Yeah, you've got some interesting, I think, analysis of the people who are calling for Joe Biden to step aside, but also the people who are not, the people who are defending him. We mentioned that there are up to 10, if not more, by the time you listen to this. Members of the House, Senator Mark Warner's convening a meeting of the senators. The governors met with President Biden in the White House last weekend. So, but there haven't been as many people to come out and call for it. Again, an unprecedented, like, hey, you should get away. And you think you notice a trend there.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the elected officials that are calling for him to step down, saying he can't win, they tend to be what you would call the more moderate members of the Democratic Party. I'm not necessarily saying they're moderates because they're still pretty liberal, but the more moderate members. What I find interesting is that AOC, Cori Bush, members of the Squad, the more left-wing, the most left-wing elements of the Democratic Party are those that are actually coming to Joe Biden's defense. And I think the reason is partly ideological. They're getting a lot of what they want from this president, and that could be because of the cognitive decline. Aides are able to sort of, put things in. But I find it quite interesting that those like Senator John Tester of Montana, who's from kind of a swing state, he's in trouble, he's from more of a red state, are saying cast this guy aside. But the progressives who are in safe districts, who are getting a lot of what they want, they are the ones that are actually the core to Biden's defense, which is ironic because, of course, the reason that the Democratic power brokers said we should support Joe Biden is he was, quote unquote, the moderate among those that were running for president in 2020.
Did John Tester really say cast this guy aside? He's not some farmhand dealing with a cattle. I think what he said is that Joe Biden has a lot of work to do to prove to me and the rest of America that he's up for the job. And he goes, this is the telling part to your point. And he goes, so I'll continue to do what I've been doing. I was like, I thought it was going to be stand with the president. He goes, stand up to Joe Biden when I think he's wrong. Like, that's what John Tester, a Democrat senator from Montana, is saying he's going to do. And I think to your point, it might be that they are getting the progressives could be happy because they're getting what they want from a Biden administration, but it could also be that the moderates are standing up to him because they know that they face a very real political threat. Like and that's like the larger point we want to make here is everyone has some measure of self-interest.
Yes.
And their self-interest has presided over, I think, the national interest, which is how a scandal like this has been allowed to happen. We made the point last week when, I don't know if you heard, we hosted Sean Hannity's radio show on national radio.
We did?
I don't know what you were doing. No, you were terrific if you haven't heard it enough. But, we made the point that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, you remember this, he was hospitalized for 3 days, and they did not disclose the fact that he was hospitalized. Yeah. And it became like a pretty big deal, like a major scandal. They had hearings about it. He was grilled in congressional committee, and ultimately his chief of staff resigned because she did not tell the White House. Like nobody knew,
because they weren't being honest.
Yeah, and it turns out his chief of staff had the flu or something. So it was one of those many work from home days in Washington. Who knows who goes into the office anymore?
Joe Biden has work from home days. Lots of work from home days.
But so that's why it becomes all the more, I think, quite problematic if it's just now revealed that the chief physician for the White House, who by the way has some other complications that we'll talk about, has been meeting with a Parkinson's expert over time. And we're just now finding out about it. It seems like that should be a really big deal.
Yeah, it should be. And here's the thing. I understand people don't want to share all the medical information about themselves. But the problem is the media is supposed to be the watchdog, right? The media was remember CNN was running stories about Donald Trump that he liked 2 scoops of ice cream, that he was asking for 2 scoops of ice cream instead of 1 from the White House mess. They ran this absurd level of detail. Some of the reporting was accurate. A lot of it was not. But the point was they were trying to hold them into account. The media was not covering any of this. I mean, I can guarantee you if a Parkinson's expert was visiting the Trump White House, the media would have uncovered it. They would have been all over it. So the media is the big loser here, I think, because they absolutely failed in the job. But what's also interesting about the White House doctor is he has some conflicting relationships that could lead one to potentially think that his motivation is not just the health of the president of the United States, but actually his commercial interests as well.
Yeah, we did some reporting and we've done a podcast actually on the failed healthcare startup that President Biden's brother Jim attempted after Joe Biden left the White House. Well, it turns out that Dr. Kevin O'Connor, this chief White House physician who was the one taking the meetings with the Parkinson's experts, which again, just in case you forgot what you just heard 10 minutes ago, a dang neurologist said on NBC News he thinks the president has Parkinson's.
And I could diagnose it from across the mall.
You could diagnose, which, kudos to him, I guess. Right. Why pay for the office space then? But that's his business model. The point becomes then, as Jim Biden was exploring these business ventures and trying to secure Veterans Affairs contracts, he had Dr. Kevin O'Connor introduce him to a number of people, and he actually took meetings together with Dr. Kevin O'Connor to the point where Politico and others are calling this guy a Biden business associate. So in June of 2017, Jim Biden and Kevin O'Connor meet with the COO of a number of hospital chains that Jim Biden's hospital concoction would eventually acquire. And that's based actually partly on Hunter Biden's email. So like, this is a real thing, and this guy's connected to the Biden business orbit also. We have our own concerns about Hunter Biden, how much money he's made because of his connection to Biden. But if the president's chief concern now is physical, right, and potentially mental, which all kind of falls under the umbrella of medical, and the guy who's in charge of that is also a Biden business associate, right, that just seems particularly relevant. Yeah,
and let's be clear about this. Let's look at the entire Biden family. We've done it before. But if you look at every one of the five, sort of what we call the Biden five family members, all of them, their financial flow of money is tied to Joe Biden's political career. I mean, let's be honest about it. None of them have professions or careers that are based anything on merit, based anything on their business acumen. They all play off of the political power, position, and access that's granted by Joe Biden. So they all don't want Joe to step down. They don't want Joe to stop being president, because once that happens, the flow of money declines. Even when Joe Biden stepped down from the vice presidency, when the Trump administration came in, there was still the prospect he was going to run for president in the future. Once he says, I'm not running for re-election, or I'm stepping down for president of the United States, it's over. It's done. Frank Biden, his brother down in Florida, is a advisor to a law firm, the Berman Law Group down in South Florida. He's not a lawyer. He has absolutely no background.
Which is why he's an advisor.
Exactly. But he's prominently on the front page of the top of the webpage. He's like the first guy listed. And everybody knows. And in the bio, it says, he was involved in the campaigns of his famous brother. I wonder who that could be. So this is the entire family's financial future is tied up with the fact that Joe Biden remained in political power. That's why this is like Stalingrad. This is like there's going to be no retreat. We are going to stick to our guns. We're going to stay in this position, because if Joe leaves, it's over for the rest of us as far as our financial futures are concerned.
You call him the Biden Five. Joe Biden calls him the Biden. Look, the idea that my family would profit off of anything I'm doing is actually the official name.
And Medicare.
So you mentioned Jim Biden and Frank Biden, and of course, the person that we spent the most time, if you listen to this podcast, chronicling their business relationships to as connected to the Biden White House, is, of course, Hunter Biden. And it's worth noting, in case you've missed it, that since the debate and when they went on this family retreat to Camp David, when they were going to have these, hey, what should we do? Hunter Biden has joined the meeting since they came back. He's now back in the White House. And it said, whereas before it was quite unusual for him to be in any kind of like real meeting. Right. I don't know if that's that whole convicted felon thing, or maybe it's remember we already kind of had the whole White House and the cocaine thing. And anyway, who knows what thing it was that's kept him out of it. But
he kept bringing all those Chinese to the White House when his dad was vice president too. There was probably
which sounds like a good setup for a joke, but it's not. It's a real thing that happened. But it said, while he is normally regularly at the White House residence events, it's unusual for him to be in and around the meetings his father's having with his team. So some of the White House aides are like, really? Hunter? That guy?
Yeah. And he reportedly is the guy that did the prep for Joe Biden for the interview with George Stephanopoulos. So he is now intimately involved in his father's future career. And, the only question is, in terms of Hollywood, is this script, they're trying to prop him up, is this Weekend at Bernie's? Or is this Dave? Remember the film Dave, where the president goes into comatose, they get sort of a body double to kind of cover for him. But that's what Hunter Biden, I think, and the family are prepared to do, to prop him up to the bitter end. Because for Hunter Biden, it's not just the financial success, quote unquote, that he's had in the past because of his father's connections. He now is looking at, he's already been charged and convicted on a felony charge with a gun. He's facing tax evasion. He's going to need a pardon, and he needs a Department of Justice that is less aggressive, because he is the son of a sitting president. What he does not want is a Department of Justice with somebody else running it. So it's going to be weekend at Bernie's, I think, as far as Hunter's concerned. He wants his dad there, even if he's not really there.
Well, if you remember the thing that had made the president in the movie Dave actually go into the coma, it's probably not the latter, right? So I'll just let you look that up. It's an old movie. It's a great movie. The budget scene with Charles Grodin is terrific, but it's a wonderful movie. So you got Hunter Biden, who's got his own incentives, and we talked about the doctor, who's a Biden business associate. His Biden business has been good to him, and obviously the brothers. And that leaves someone whose profile seems to be ascending and emerging, and that would be no less than, do not call her Mrs. She is Dr. Jill Biden. She has been profiled in the New York Times, called her Philly Tough, a characterization you found to be quite laughable. I don't know why.
Philly Tough, but she wears Neiman Marcus.
You're the clothes guy. I don't know what that. I'm still trying to figure out the Stalingrad reference. So, but she's been stumping now by herself. She traveled to give a speech on her own in North Carolina, and as you noted, the day after the debate in which Joe Biden was seemingly kind of, for lack of a better term, pantsed in front of the country, she's on the cover of Vogue looking quite glamorous. And what did the phrase on the cover of the magazine say?
We will decide the future.
So you feel like she is enjoying this moment. And you also noted, I think you should talk about this. This is not the first time a first lady has had more power because of the physical decline of her husband.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think if you want to look at American history, you look at the Woodrow Wilson administration. Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke, and he stayed in office even though he was physically impaired. And the doctor in the White House later said, yeah, no, he's not really capable of basic functions. So it was his wife, Edith Wilson, who basically took charge. And even if you go to whitehouse.gov, the official website, they talk about the fact that Edith Wilson was taking meetings. She was making decisions. She was making staff decisions. She was making policy decisions. And what's interesting is historians say that in 1920, Woodrow Wilson and his wife wanted him to run for a third term. He'd now had a stroke for 2 years. She had effectively been running things for 2 years. He wanted to run for a third term. It was only because the White House doctor went to Democratic Party power brokers and said, look, basically, the guy's a vegetable. He should not be president of the United States. That the Democratic power brokers said, okay, we're not going to reelect this guy and make him our candidate for a third term. And they switched to somebody else. But that's what it shows like to cling to power. And the sense is with Jill Biden, she loves the perks. In fact, you found something I think very, very interesting that developed in 2022. Tell us about that.
So, and this is based on reporting that T. Beckett Adams did in the Washington Examiner, and it's kind of got an interesting backstory. But if we have it up, listen to this, and then we'll talk about what it is you're hearing. So that is music that was played at the Teacher of the Year Rex celebrations, actually the 2020 and 2021 National Teacher of the Year celebration that was held on the White House lawn. And now what T. Beckett Adams reported is that Jill Biden, that song is something called Fanfare for the First Lady, which per his reporting was something that the Biden administration asked the Marine Corps band to develop as a song for her.
And this had never been done before in American history. No first lady had ever had this.
And as you noted, she is not the first lady. There have been others.
A few.
And we've played music for presidents for a while, right. And it turns out she's not the first person apparently to request their own song. Reagan Chief of Staff Don Reagan wanted his own music, which you said is
fitting with his personality.
Okay,
yeah.
So
but it's, to me, it's a fascinating find that you uncovered here, which is the notion that the First Lady of the United States is supposed to have her own introductory song, which has never been done in history. To me, it speaks to the arrogance and the sense of entitlement that this first lady has.
Well, and to be fair, in the reporting, they get a quote from Joe Biden's spokesperson that said that story is false, that we never asked for our own song. This was already sort of in the works, and they came to us with it, and we never would request the first lady to have her own song.
Yeah, right.
And then supposedly there's a note to it that, though it was played at that October Teacher of the Year event, and it was played a couple of times, they then took it out of the catalog after this article came out because of the negative press coverage. And so if you believe Joe Biden that they never did it, that's fine. But here's the problem. It's not like they've been telling the truth about other things related to the Biden White House, not telling the truth about Hunter Biden and his connection to the Biden White House and his business dealings, not telling the truth about Joe Biden's physical condition. So why would we believe that? And it's kind of a silly little thing, but it does, as one of our associates said, it smells true, and it seems consistent with what seems to be happening, which is Jill Biden loves the power.
It's emblematic. To me, it's emblematic of the other things that we're seeing and this desire. I mean, even Michael Moore called it elder abuse, the fact that they're propping Joe Biden out there. And who's the main driver of that? I mean, Jill Biden could close this down tomorrow. She does not want to close it down. So we've talked about the Biden family members and the reason that they want him to stay in. Let's talk about the others that are kind of starting to switch, and that is the big money people in the Democratic Party. So they did what the mainstream media did, is they dismissed all this talk about his mental decline, about him slowing down until the debate. And then like a light switch, a lot of them reversed positions. There was a letter sent out a couple of days ago, 168 business leaders, including Christy Walton of the Walmart family fortune and others, saying that it's time for Joe Biden to step down. These are Democratic Party donors. Other big donors are saying that they're not going to give to the Biden campaign if he's running. They're only going to give to congressional Democrats. So the question is why were these, allegedly smart, high-flying, sophisticators donors doing it? And again, I think you have to look at the perks.
Yeah, the perks and the self-interest. Everyone's out for themselves. The Wall Street Journal said that some donors kept their concerns quiet because they didn't want to risk their access or influence. No one wanted to jeopardize a chance, this is from the Wall Street Journal, to become an ambassador or to host a fundraiser.
Yeah.
So, and that's maybe, so then why would it switch? Because they're now concerned about getting to be an ambassador. If Joe Biden doesn't win, they don't get to be the Swiss ambassador and throw lots of parties.
That's right. And here's a tweet from Kenneth Vogel. He's a reporter with the New York Times, reporting on a story, Shades of the Lincoln Bedroom. You remember that story in the Clinton administration? People were paying and getting to spend the night. Of the 16 people who wrote a single max $929,600 check to the Biden Victory Fund, 11 of those individuals or their spouses had small meetings at the White House. So it's access. The point being that if you invested money in a campaign, you don't care if the guy's completely coherent. You want to make sure that you get your access, you get your meetings. And what changed with the debate, of course, was not Joe Biden's mental acuity. It was the fact of his electability and the fact that he was now a liability to lose this election. That's the only reason it changed. So a lot of the big money people jumping ship to me are indications that they have a real problem, even more than the New York Times and the Boston Globe and others calling for him to step down. The fact that the big money people are saying we're holding back money, that means they got serious problems in the Democratic Party.
Do you think Joe Biden is to be congratulated for not allowing people to spend the night in the White House? You know why they're not doing it, right?
Why?
Well, it's not worth it. He goes to bed at 8. So what are you going to do? It's like, what kind of cable do you think White House really gets?
Right. They're waiting for the party.
It's like, you might as well stay at an Airbnb.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
No, so this is an example of, I think, the reason that people get frustrated with DC is there's so much self-interest taking place, and we understand that people operate in terms of self-interest, but it should not be a surprise to us that we are in this position. The media abdicated their responsibility because they were getting what they wanted. The Biden family advocated their responsibility to care for their father and or their husband and to avoid public embarrassment because they were getting what they wanted. And the big donors, the same thing. They all dismissed these reports as cheap fakes. They attacked the people who were reporting on them. And the reason was all this corrupt self-interest.
You know, it's funny, is Trump used to criticize everything as fake news, and that got dismissed. But it turns out cheap fakes were fake news.
Right. Another thing to add to our terminology. So the question is, where is this all going to lead? If we look at the array of forces, is it in the Democratic Party, the fact that the president has the power and the people around him have the power to maintain this position, or is the money going to win out in the end? And I say the money and the supporters are going to win out in the end. The window's closing quickly, and there's going to hit a point of no return where they can't make the change. But I think that Joe Biden will not be the Democratic nominee, and it's not because he's passed away. Yeah. It's not because he was shot or anything terrible happened to him. It's going to be because he has been forced to step down by the power brokers in the party.
I disagree. I actually think that Joe Biden will stick around. And let me just say this, and this seems like a joke, but it's not. I have a grandmother who's 94, and she actually had a stroke back last fall, and so she's now in an assisted living facility. She lived by herself for a long time, but has been in an assisted living facility. My parents were taken care of, and they talked to her, and they said, what'd you think of the debate? And my 94-year-old stroke-suffering grandmother goes, I didn't think Joe Biden did so bad. That's a real thing. And I just think that it depends on where you're coming from. There's a perspective. You get older, like you're going to evaluate yourself on a different scale. And I think that, if it ultimately comes down to Joe Biden deciding I'm out, I don't think he's going to do it.
Well, and I think you can also say, look, if you look at the polls, yes, Trump is ahead in the polls, but it's not double digits. I mean, Joe Biden is still within striking distance. This race is not over. And I think anybody who thinks that it is, if Joe Biden does stay in, is making a mistake.
And I think if you let a couple of days go by, a new news cycle comes in, they start talking about that 2025 agenda, you start talking about Donald Trump will do a thing, and it'll become about Donald Trump, and then Joe Biden will say something nasty about Donald Trump, like, oh, he's got it. Yeah. Like, they just have to kind of get through this. Yeah. And I think if they get through this, the next debate's not going to be till September anyway. He can read a speech at this convention. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, by the way, Lawrence O'Donnell from MSNBC News is on the record as saying in the next debate, it's only fair, and he meant this seriously, that Joe Biden should be allowed to have aides with him during the debate. So that's kind of where we are within the Democratic Party and what their expectations are of their candidate.
Reasonable accommodations in the ADA.
Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listen to us. We enjoy doing this podcast. We also enjoy hearing from you, feedback from you. So please do send us messages on Twitter X. Please do comment on Google and other places where you can find this podcast.
Or check us out on Instagram Reels or Rumble. We're on every platform you can find. This is literally the biggest story in the country, and we've been covering it for a while, and we're going to continue to be everywhere you want information to be.
You can go to thedrilldown.com to see some of the things we're working on. And of course, you can find this podcast wherever great podcasts are located. Thanks again. Until next time.